Welcome to Fjooken Enterprises YouTube channel. I realize this is probably the third Vampire the Masquerade video I've done with Leaf, and November and December is when they're probably going to get posted, but it is what it is, and I just had a bunch of basically random questions about the clans, I think.
Yeah.
Welcome, heroes and villains, to Fjooken Enterprises YouTube channel. Take a moment, relax, stop your bickering, and just enjoy the show. As I said in the intro, I wanted to ask you about the clans in Vampire the Masquerade, but this could be someone's first video, so before we get into that, what is Vampire the Masquerade?
It is a adult horror tabletop RPG in which you play a vampire or a descendant of Cain, the first murderer. So you play a vampire.
And if I understand correctly, clans are different types of vampires?
They're bloodlines. So each clan is, you could consider it's a familial group, right? So each clan of vampires is essentially related in that they come from the same source. They have similar powers, similar culture, because it's a clan, right? So everyone is related by their bloodline, by their vampire type, by the clan's own traditions and customs and history.
I know we kind of discussed this in a past interview, but what is the Malkavian clan exactly?
They're largely one of the wild cards in vampire society. They also have, because of their madness, which is a curse but also a blessing, they do have a lot of oracle-like abilities. So they do have some ability to predict the future and also manipulate said future. Because if it's like the future, even in the world darkness, the future is very much like this gray thing. It's multiple possible fates. So the Malkavians, they do have the ability to not only see those future threads of fate, but also manipulate those future threads of fate, and thus determine their future that they want.
Were they always insane?
No, that's actually like, amongst immortal vampires, new is kind of relative, but it's a relatively new thing. It comes from their one of their clan disciplines that is a new mutation. It's happened new time, which is like of the last few centuries.
From what I can tell from the Wikipedia, the Malkavian clans are Auspex, Obfuscate, and Dementia. Is a Dimension power the only one that makes it Malkavian, or do the others' powers affect that?
No, it would be a combination. So it would be the combination of three, because Auspex is essentially heightened senses, and one of the early powers you get from it is essentially you literally see person's aura, or person, place, or thing's aura. But that between that and the demonitation and the obfuscate, they all kind of mix together to affect how the Malkavian interacts with the world around them and how the world around them interacts with them. So it's a combination of all three, but their madness pretty much only comes from the dementation, but the other two do help kind of do fill out their consciousness and their personalities.
Does every clan have a unique power like the Malkavians and Dementia?
There's a few that do, yeah. Okay, so the Michi have flesh crafting. That's pretty much unique to them. The Lasambara have their weird shadow control thing, and that's pretty much unique to them. Of course, non-clan vampires can learn those disciplines. It's just a lot harder, because a lot of the power comes from the blood, right? So if it's kind of like a nurture versus nature thing, right? So it's in the nature of these vampire clans to have these powers, and other clans want to have the powers. Then they have to grab the nurture of it, right? So they have to learn it versus nature versus nurture. Yeah. So the Lost Umbara have the Shadow Thing. The Zamichi have their flesh crafting. The Giovanni have their necromancy. The Tremere have their can't remember what it's called, but essentially it's vampire blood magic. It's vampire blood magic. Have you ever seen like any of the Blade movies? Anytime they get into like that mystical stuff in it, that's kind of like that's like Tremere blood magic. It's weird. It's really weird what they can do with it. But yeah, that's pretty much unique to that clan. Just like all like the others. But most of them are the standard disciplines.
So doing research, I came across the fact that there have been clans that have been wiped out, like the Capelsaden and the Salwi. Sorry if I butchered those names, including the Antediluvians, which leads me to a few questions. First off, what are Antediluvians?
Antediluvians is actually a biblical term, just like Methuselah's. Okay, so when it came down to essentially Cain was the first vampire, he was cursed by I think first it was Michael, then Raphael, and then Gabriel, and then Michael came along. So it was a series of curses. Eventually he got his curse power, he got his vampire on. Lilith helped him out to discover his power and how to turn the curse into blessing and power, and such. And then he wanted off because Cain's colossal asshole. And he didn't want to. No woman's gonna be more powerful than me. And Lilith was Lilith's the first woman in the world of darkness, the first mage, the awakened mage. So the first human really to mess around with reality. So she was leagues more powerful than Cain. So Cain wanders off into the wilderness. He gets lonely. He makes three children, who are also biblical figures or names, like Enoch, and Enoch's siblings. But eventually, Cain wanders off into the wilderness again to kind of just be alone. So, some alone time in the woods. So his three children, they get lonely. They want children, so they make some more children. So those children are referred to as the Antediluvians. Antediluvians. So, Cain's direct child in the second generation, they didn't have any unique. Like they're more like Cain than anything else. But the Antediluvians, at that point, any of their children, which are the Methuselahs, are more like the Antediluvians. As in, the Antediluvians had essentially they were the proto clans. Essentially, like if you're talking about like a gangrel, then that's gangrel, right? If you're talking about Bruja, that's Bruja, right? They are the ones that founded the actual clan systems and a lot of the traditions and customs, and their children are direct reflections of them, not so much Cain. Because of that second generation, there's a disconnect between Cain and them, so any of the clan vampires are more reflective of the Antediluvians than they are of the second generation, which the Antediluvians wiped out at one point, because, they just wanted power, so they wiped out their sires, or Cain, so yeah. So the Antediluvians are the founders of are the founders of the clans, and some of them got wiped out because their children didn't like having someone older and more powerful than them.
So why are those two clans considered basically wiped out, with the Antediluvians wiped out and not really considered the real clans, but the Ravnos, who don't have an Antediluvian, are considered a clan?
Yeah, that's because the Tremere. So the Tremere are not one of the original 13 clans. They're actually a group of human mages that saw vampires, went, huh, that's nifty. Let's figure out how that worked. So they grabbed the Antediluvian of this Subadai, and who was also, I believe, the Antediluvian of the Cappadocians. And he was at the point where he was essentially kind of suffering from PTSD, clinical depression, and he kind of just let them grab him, and they did a whole lot of experimentations on him, and then they figured out, oh, nifty, we can become vampires. So they became vampires, and their leader of the Tremere essentially drained all the blood from Subadai, the Antediluvian, and then, aha, I am now Antediluvian, I am now founding my own clan, the Tremere. And then the Tremere then went out and hunted down pretty much all the other the two members of the Subadai and the Cappadocians. They hunted them down to extinction. So that's why they're considered a dead clan. The Antivillian is dead, and the clan itself is dead. There's still a few members alive here and there kicking around, but most of the clan is considered extinct. While the Ravenos are still a clan, like there's still members, and there's still enough of a population that they can bounce back from, losing their founder.
So are the rules to play those two clans that have been members of those two clans that have been wiped out?
There are rules. They're actually in the 20th anniversary edition. They do include rules to play both the Cappadocians and the Sulbadai or the Sulburi. Both versions, because there's actually two versions of the Sulburi. There's a warlike bloodline, and then there's a pacifist bloodline. So there's in the whole because they have flushed out like a lot of the personalities and Antivillians and Sulburi. He was a philosopher warrior, so therefore he has two bloodlines that distinctly split between those two philosophies. He has like one half which they're kind of like paladins, warrior philosophers, and the other one which are philosopher pacifists, because he kind of had both aspects in his personality.
I think you mentioned in an earlier interview that the Bruja were also at one point warrior poets.
Yeah, they kind of did their own fall. And that had to do with with Rome. So back in the day, in at least the World of Darkness, the Ventru clan attached themselves and their prosperity to Rome, while the Bruja attached their prosperity and their fate essentially to Carthage. And as anyone who knows a little about history and is a little bit history buff, Carthage didn't win. So when Rome just torched Carthage, the Bruja clan kind of lost a lot of their foundation and a lot of their geopolitical power, and they also had a bit of a fall. And there's also this weird love story wrapped up in there. So because the modern Bruja may not actually be the real Bruja, the true Bruja may be something entirely different, and it's weird caught up family dynamics things that's also wrapped up in the whole fall of Carthage. Because at least in the lore, the whole reason Carthage went human sacrificey was because of the true Bruja. They were running the show and they demanded human sacrifice.
From what I read on the Wikipedia, which Wikipedias aren't always the most accurate sources, the Splat books would be way more accurate sources, as you know. But as I was reading on the Wikipedia, the Bruja in the Dark Ages were high clans, and nowadays they're low clan. That seems like a bit far removed from the fall of Carthage. So what caused them to fall from high to low?
It was still the fall of Carthage, because you gotta understand, these are vampires that are, they're effectively immortal, right? So a lot of the elders survived the fall of Carthage, it took centuries for that backlash to, actually catch up to the clan as a whole. There's also, during the Dark Ages, there's also some other political upheavals amongst the clans, and just general shifting of culture and tradition. But a lot of it, that first domino, the first domino effect was Carthage falling, and then it just essentially just kept as a more dominoes, more and more of a snowball effect, until finally, sometime post medieval age, the Bruja just fell from the high ranks to the low.
Why did they keep the same aspects and powers when they fell from high to low clans?
They didn't. One of the things they lost was the original. Okay, so the true Bruja they have a discipline that's essentially it's called a Temptus. Essentially, it's a power that allows them to manipulate time. The normal Bruja, the fallen Bruja, the standard Bruja, they don't have that power. They lost that along the way. So that's also the big sign of how they lost, is that they lost that discipline, and that's in lore in Splat fluff. Within the Bruja clan, that's one of the ways that they use to tell who's a true Bruja and who's not. And of course, those that don't have it still consider themselves the true Bruja, just because They don't. They think they think those Brujah that call themselves the true Brujah are false Brujah, because it's the family dynamics, right? It's the guy, it's the powers in charge. They've essentially usurped the power, and they don't want their childer, and there's childlers, and there's childless to know that they're usurpers. They want to be the norm, right? But then there's the true Brujah who believe, no, we're the true Brujah because we actually come from Brujah. You just come from that asshole that stole Brujah's power. So the loss. So because that's caused historical dynamic and propaganda and lies and truth. You look at any long lasting cultural group and if they have any hidden secrets, right? So but yeah, that the loss of that power is one of those big things of why they fell, is because the clan as a whole lost that discipline.
I remember in a previous interview you mentioned that the Nosferatu were cursed because they were too proudful, but the Toreador are just as prideful at being beautiful. Why weren't they also cursed to be ugly?
Because Cain's an asshole. Cain's a vindictive, spiteful, asshole. He like half the curses and half the punishments he did on a sheer whim. It's like, why did it's like a whim? That's just because Cain felt Cain felt uppity that day. It's because the Toreador have done plenty enough to to warn a curse. It's just they brown nose better than Nosferatu. And luck of the draw, whim. Cain's a a vindictive, spiteful asshole. Excusing the French and whatnot, or the curse words, but yeah, or the curse language and whatnot, but yeah, it comes down to Cain's just he's a bad father.
Speaking of the Toreador, I hope I'm saying that right, or as close to right as possible.
Yeah.
Speaking of them, it's from what I was reading on the Wikipedia, they seem in the Middle Ages to be the people that were proud of the art that was produced in the Middle Ages, and they seem to not like modern art, such as the only thing I could think of at the time when I asked the question was the Emperor text-to-speech device 40K thing. Is that accurate?
Yeah, no, 100%. It's because again, these are these are immortal beings, right? So the current elders of the clan were sired, were converted. Converted is not the word. Sired, in the Middle Ages, in the Renaissance. So that's the art they grew up with. So like, you look at anyone now, you look at Gen Xers, we're like, you know what? The best rock music came from the 80s. Everything past the 80s is just junk music, right? Same thing, right? It's just now you're dealing with, essentially mortal, blood-sucking, demons and, mortal flesh. So yeah, it's the same thing. It's our generation's music and stuff, right? Or art. Or so they look at a lot of the new stuff like they just feel it's crud because a lot of them were from that period, right? They were there when Leonardo da Vinci and Raphael and all the great masters did their thing. And so because of that, that's the best art ever, and all the new art is just trash. While you're looking at the younger vampires, like any of the younger Toreador that are like embraced. There we go. That's the word, embrace. That's the proper word. In like the 60s, they think 60s and 70s music is the best music, right? And those that that were earlier in like the 1800s, folk music is where it's at, right? It's a generational thing. But for the Toreador, again, they're immortal vampires, right? So you're just gonna have all the normal stresses you have in normal generational society are just exacerbated because everyone's fucking still alive. And again, sorry for the swearing, but yeah, everyone's still alive. So.
How do generations work in Vampire the Masquerade?
Okay, so the first vampire was Cain. The second generation is his direct childer. The Antediluvians is the third generation. The Methuselahs are like the fourth and fifth generation. Elders or princes are typically 6th through 7th, I think, and then 8th, 8, 9, and 10 are and Cilii, or there's a name for it, I'm butchering it, and then and then there's I think maybe another one. And then Neonite is the newest is the 13th generation, and essentially the further from Cain you are, the less powerful you are. So the closer to Cain you are, the more powerful you are. And that typically reflects in the lore wise of just you being more powerful. Like Methuselah's essentially are vampires that are all over 1,000 to 2,000 or more years, and at that point the curse mutates their flesh somehow. It's so they just become different. The curse just mutates their body. Would probably be the best. Yeah, it's so things like if they have one of their main disciplines was fortitude, their skin becomes like stone. So they become even more resistant to damage, things like that, right? And that's because they're closer to Cain in power level. And mechanic wise, it affects it in that the higher up your generation, the lower your generation number. The bigger your blood pool, which is the source of all your power. The more blood points you can spend per turn. The higher you can use blood points to raise your attributes. The higher your attributes and skills can be. The higher your discipline skills can be, because for most it's maxed at 5. When you get to elders, it's higher, and then when we get to Methuselah's, it's higher, and at Divinians, it's even higher. So you get to Cain, you get anyone about Methuselah level or higher, or maybe an elder actually. You can have a 10 in strength.
Can you move up generations as a vampire then?
Oh, you sure can. It is very illegal. At least in the Camarilla. It's literally like one of the things. It's a big no-no. It's a big naughty. It's called again, I'm not. There's a lot of Latin words. Deliberate. Essentially, it's I think it's a Latin word for like drinking. But essentially, yeah, a lower generation vampire can drink the blood of a higher generation vampire to the point where they kill the higher generation vampire, and then they shift their generation up. It, however, does murder to their like aura, so that anyone with Auspex can look at that vampire and go like, oh hey, that's a vampire that drank another vampire. And it shows in your aura, so yeah, which is why it's a big no-no. Because again, the higher ups are like, we don't want our child to eat us or drink us. So yeah, no, that's a no-no.
Is what you explained about how the further generation you are, the weaker you are, why 14th generation is a flaw that you can take?
Yeah. 14th and 15th generation is a flaw you can take. And essentially, you become really kind of like Blade. You become a daywalker. Because the vampire curse is so thin to you, the sun doesn't hate you anymore, because the sun doesn't consider you a vampire anymore, or like you're close enough to human that the sun would just look at you and go like, you know what, you're close enough. You still have a blood pool. You can still use disciplines. You can still use blood points, and raise your stats. You can still do all the things a vampire do, but you still need to like sleep. You still need to eat, drink. You'll even grow old and die. You can also procreate. So like 14th or 15th generation vampires can get it on and have a baby, and which will be a 15th or 16th generation vampire. Or if the end time prophecies are correct, it will be a sign of doom and actually be a full vampire, and thus be one of the signs of Gehenna, or the end times.
Seems like what we were talking about from Brujah and Malkavians, the disciplines, I think they're called, make a vampire what they are.
Yeah, largely because the disciplines are a reflection of how the curse of Cain manifests through the power of blood. You can flesh out a lot of a vampire with their stats, their abilities, merits and flaws, and the virtues are also a big thing, because one of the power mechanics is the virtue. So courage, willpower, and self-control. And willpower is so it's the disciplines are one of the key things that really can influence how a vampire acts and behaves.
Considering how long we've been talking and we've only really discussed 3 of the 13 plus clans, we can definitely come back to this, but for now I'm going to end it with my usual question. Anything or anyone you would like to shout out at this time?
Oh, geez, I think this is like my 4th interview, because I think the 3 on World Darkness. I think there's another one too way back in like before COVID or something too, that was about just general tabletop stuff. So I'm just gonna do a shout out to you. Thanks for inviting me out there to this interviews. They've been a hoot and a half, a full hootenanny, I tells ya.
As I said earlier, I plan to have all those vampire interviews out before the new year.